Cero. Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes. Eh, bueno, voy a empezar a hablar en inglés, dado que el taller está pensado para que sea impartido en inglés, y voy a empezar un poco por presentarme y en los objetivos del mismo. My name is Héctor Duarte. I work at the National Electoral Institute in Mexico City, specifically at an area that is called the Executive Directorate of Electoral Training and Civic Education. And I am pleased to welcome the people that are joining us today on this workshop, which is organized really under the leadership of the electoral counselor Arturo Castillo, and with the generous support of the Consulate Network of Mexico. And we were asked to do this event in English because we have understand that there are many people that live in the US and that may have Mexican origin, but that do not speak Spanish. So for people in the US that want to know a little bit more about these topics, as I was saying, I work in the civic education area at the National Electoral Institute. And in fact, I studied political science as a major and made my master's on comparative politics in the United Kingdom. And I've always been really interested, really keen in differences and similarities between countries and in their political systems. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about this workshop that we are having. The workshop is going to be a discussion on the similarities and the differences between the political systems of Mexico and the United States. And these two countries, as you probably know, share important ties. They play in CONCACAF, for instance. And they're gonna host the 2026 World Cup, right? No, but I'm just joking. Actually, they share a lot of ties and a lot of millions of people that hold both nationalities, both American and Mexican, and their countries have grown. They have a long history together, but they have grown together in the last few decades with a lot of exchange between in the border and between both countries. And this workshop, I think it's particularly timely because both countries are having elections on 2024. The Mexican election is happening on June 2nd, and the American election on the first Tuesday of November, as it is traditionally held. This is going to be on November 5th, so it's going to be really interesting. And during these elections, the presidential office, the local officials, and the legislative branch will be renewed in both our countries. So in this workshop, through a series of slides, we will explore key aspects of both political systems. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the distribution of power, about the electoral system, and amount of things that are quite interesting: electoral management, electoral organization. I'm gonna try to be really quick, and we are also having a brief activity with a learning platform called Kahoot. So it's gonna be a lot of fun, and we can test the knowledge of the people that are today with us, and how much did they learn. It's gonna be in English, so I'm sorry if you're not familiar with English, but if you are, it's gonna be fun, I promise. So first, I'm gonna read some of the agenda that we have for today. As I said, I'm gonna try to do it quite dynamic, and also I would like to hear from you. If you have questions, maybe we can spare some time at the end. We have an hour and a half for this workshop, but hopefully there are some questions and we have enough time to answer a couple of them. So firstly, I would like to go through a quick introduction of the history of both nations. Where do we come from? And these are some of the reasons that explain the political system that today we have in Mexico and in the US. And then I would like to talk a little bit about the traditional division of powers, which is executive, legislative, and judiciary. There are important similarities, but also differences. And afterwards, I would like to talk about the autonomous bodies, which are a significant innovation in terms of the constitutional framework in Mexico. And afterwards, electoral management, which is the area where I found more differences: electoral management, electoral organization, which is quite different in Mexico and in the US. And finally, some wrap up. We're gonna have some conclusions of some of the aspects that we are discussing today. So I'm happy to start with the Mexican political system. As you may know, the Mexican system, or Mexico as a nation, was born in 1810 when the struggle for independence started with Miguel Hidalgo, and the country was recognized as independent, usually conventionally, since 1821, and this was when the Mexican Empire was born. The first federal constitution, however, was drafted and approved in 1824. So this is an important year, and actually the US Constitution was quite influential for this first constitution, federal constitution. So let me drink some water because my throat is a little bit dry, but uh, thanks for your patience. Well, afterwards, sorry about that, we have, of course, the turbulent 19th century in Mexico, and afterwards, the Constitution in 1917 was approved, and this was a direct consequence of the Mexican Revolution. So the Constitution, the current Constitution in Mexico, is about 100 years old, more or less. It's quite a different Constitution from its beginning, of course, because it has been amended a lot of times. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about it later in the presentation. And another important aspect is the transition to democracy. So during the 20th century, we have a hegemonic party, which was the currently known as the Institutional Revolutionary Party. But because of the effort of many citizens, millions of citizens, we had an important, of course, I'm doing it really quick here, quick review, but we had an important transition to power, many electoral reforms and political reforms, which finalized with the alternation of power the first time in 70 years in 2000, when the PAN won the presidency against the PRI for the first time, as I said, in more than 70 years. So these are some of the most important highlights of long history. I would like now to talk a little bit more. Next slide, on a brief introduction to the US political systems. Also, as you probably know, the USA became independent in uh, the next slide, if possible, please. La siguiente, por favor. The next slide talks a little bit about how the US became independent from the United Kingdom in July 4th, 1776. The Constitution of the US, which is one of the first Republican constitutions, was drafted in 1787. And as you can see in the screen, it has been in place ever since. So it's a long constitution, almost 250 years old. And it also always only been amended, 27 times. So this is quite shocking. Only 27 times in almost 250 years, which is impressive. The Mexican Constitution has been amended. I was looking for this the other day. 252 times. So almost 10 times more than the US Constitution. I think someone has the microphone on. Tienen su micrófono. Pero si me pueden ayudar. And well, it is commonly referred as one of the oldest democracies in the world because in this constitution it was one of the first in which the people had power over its government. So this is quite important. Of course, in when we talk about the history of the US, we have to mention that some of the most problematic issues have had to do with low equality of minority groups. Slavery was in place originally when the US became independent. It was well in place until the 19th century, until the Civil War. And there were discriminatory laws known as the Jim Crow laws in place until the 20th century. So this is something that, of course, we should bear in mind when discussing the US Constitution and the US political system. It's still harmful for some of the minorities, and especially for African American, but also Latino groups and others. So on the next slide, la siguiente, I would like to talk a little bit about the executive branch in Mexico and the United States. If you excuse me a little bit. So Some of the similarities that we have a presidential system. In a presidential system, also, as you may know, the legislative and the president are in separate branches, and the head of government and head of state are the same person. So this is the president. In Mexico, AMLO. In the US, Joe Biden. Unlike in Europe, in Europe they have different system in which the head of state is the king, head of government is the prime minister, and the legislative and executive branches are basically working as a single one. And the attributions, the legal attributions, of course, are quite similar between between Mexico and the US. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It has foreign policy attributions, conducts foreign policy, and has the right of initiative before Congress. There are also important differences. In Mexico, there is a 6-year term without re-election. In the US, it's shorter. It's only 4 years. Mandate with re-election. The 22nd Amendment, which was approved in 1951, bears presidents for running more than once for re-election, so they can only serve for 2 terms. This is something that is enshrined in tradition since George Washington, the first president of the United States. Excuse me a little bit. Thank you. Another important difference is that Mexico elects its president directly by the people. It's a direct vote system in which the candidate that has the most votes is the one who wins. And in the US, is indirectly elected by the Electoral College. The Electoral College is this system of delegates in which each state chooses a group of delegates depending on the size of the state, which then chooses the president. It's an indirect system, although delegates usually vote for the candidate they represent. Hello, Adal, and good afternoon from Chicago, and thank you for joining us. Okay, so now I would like to talk about the legislative branch. La siguiente diapositiva. Both countries have a bicameral Congress, which is composed of an upper and a lower chamber. And this is another particularity that we share both in Mexico and in the US. So as I said, we have more in common than playing CONCACAF. So as you have seen many things that we share in our political systems, as I said, both countries have been influenced by traditions, by theoretical traditions such as republicanism. And as I said, the US Constitution was quite influential in the first federal constitution in Mexico. Well, in Mexico, we have a Chamber of Deputies, which is composed by 500 deputies and a Senate with 128. And in the US, there's a House of Representatives, 435 members, and a Senate with 100 members. And the lower chamber in both countries represents populations. So representatives are allocated by the amount of population that they represent in districts and areas. In Mexico, it's a bit different because we also have proportional representation, something that I'm gonna explain further in the presentation. And the upper chamber represents states. So each state has the same number of representatives, although we may have very large states like Estado de Mexico, or really small ones like Nayarit, which has a population which is not as large. Or in the case of the US, Wyoming with California, right? Which have the same number of Senate seats, although their population is quite different, being California much larger than Wyoming. The next slide is la siguiente diapositiva. Talks a little bit more. Sorry about that. About the electoral system. In Mexico, it's mixed. We have a mixed system in which we combine proportional representation and a first past the post system. And in the US, it's only majoritarian, which means that basically it is quite savage because the winner takes it all. And it's just purely first past the post since the beginning of the US. In Mexico, if you are not familiar with electoral systems, we combine both methods. So there's winner takes it all and a majority system. But if a party, there's also a list system in which if a party receives 20% of the vote, then 20% of the vote of the seats, are going to be allocated to that party. Consequently, this has important implications in terms that the Mexican electoral system better reflects proportionality than the American counterpart. And you can see this in the number of parties in Congress. So I took a measure that is used in political science. The effective number of parties in Mexico is 2 times 2.21. In the US, it's only 2. It's a purely bicameral bipartisan system based on the electoral system that the US has. Well, regarding the electoral system, we have for deputies in Mexico, there's a 3-year term limit and 6-year term limit for senators, and there's a limit to re-election. Well, in the US, we have 2-year term representatives and 6-year term senators. Re-election is not limited. They can run as many times as they want. The re-election rate in the US, it is quite large. So most of the time, the incumbents have the advantage to win when they run for re-election. Here I got some interesting figures regarding the re-election rate of the US House of Representatives, which is almost 100%, and in the US Senate, it's 100%. So this is an important difference. In Mexico, actually, re-election was just approved, was just in place a few years ago, and for the first time in 2021. Okay, now I would like to talk a little bit about the last branch of government, which is the judicial branch. In the next slide. Both in Mexico and in the US, the Supreme Court reviews the constitutionality of laws and acts of government. So the court acts like a gatekeeper for the Constitution. And this has been based since the precedents, which was set by the US Supreme Court in the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803. So an important feature is that constitutional judges are appointed by the Senate, but are proposed by the executive. So the executive puts it to consideration to the Senate in both countries. In Mexico, this is a list of 3 people, and in the US, it's just one person. So the Mexican court is composed by 11 ministers with a 15-year tenure. And in the case of the US Supreme Court, it's quite interesting that judges have long life tenure. This means that they can only leave the court when they retire, when they resign, when they are impeached, or when they die, of course. So this is to make them these long tenures most of the time, is to guarantee their independence and to not be interested in the consequences after they get out of the job. This way it is so long. On the next slide, I would like to talk about the judicial branch, but an interesting topic, which is elections. In Mexico, we have a specialized jurisdictional authority, which is the Tribunal Electoral del Poder Judicial de la Federación, which delves on matters only regarding elections, and it is, of course, specialized and regulated, and more regulated than the American system. These are judges which are permanently dedicated to electoral matters, and in fact, there's a court, but there are also regional courts that are specialized on certain states where elections happen, and this may decide on the application of the inapplication of electoral laws, which are considered unconstitutional. But the system is quite complex because, as I said before, there's also a Supreme Court, which also decides on the invalidity of the contested norms. And there's no need of a concrete action to happen. So both the Supreme Court and the Electoral Court judge on the constitutionality of electoral matters. In the US, it is quite different because only the regular courts they discuss on electoral matters. So there are no specialized courts in the US. You can see this on special and important cases like the Bush versus Gore case in 2000, or regarding electoral regulations. I included the controversy between Citizens United and the Federal Electoral Commission of 2008, I think it was. So in the US, the intervention of judges is more exceptional than in Mexico, because as I said also before, it is not as elections are not as contested as in the US. So this is something that I'm gonna get deeper in the next slides when we discuss the electoral systems. So now regarding autonomous bodies, which is the next slide. The autonomous bodies are a bit strange because they do not belong to a branch of government, but the branches of government participate in their integration. For for instance, their boards are designated with participation of the executive and different chambers in Mexico. This is a case, for example, for the INE, the National Electoral Institute. INE is product of the participation of the Chamber of Deputies, which selects the electoral councillors after a series of tests of technical knowledge. But there are many autonomous bodies in Mexico. There's INE, there's Banco de Mexico, which is the central bank. There's EFT, which is specialized on telecommunications, and INEGI, among many others. INEGI is specialized on production of statistical information. And these autonomous bodies do not, as I said, do not belong to a branch of government. They are independent, but they are part of the Mexican state as a whole. And they oversee technical duties outside of government influence and have special finance, which is quite important because, of course, finance is an important thing for being independent. And as I have shown, there are a variety of topics in which they participate and they have functions. In turn, in the US, in contrast, they are not included in the US Constitution. Some agencies, some government agencies have some sort of autonomy in practice. This is the case, for instance, for NASA or the APA, the Agency for Protection of the Environment. Greetings from Veracruz. So happy to have some people from Veracruz. Sorry about doing this in English, but this was the original request. So I hope you are familiar. And well, so the US does not foresee the existence of autonomous bodies. So this is an important difference. And now I would like to touch upon the next topic, which is the federal system in both the US and in Mexico. As I said before, both countries, in the next slide, you may see, siguiente diapositiva, that both countries have a federal structure. So they are composed by states, independent, autonomous, not independent, but federal states. In the case of Mexico, we have 32 federal entities. The last federal entity was the Ciudad de Mexico. Before it was a federal district, and in the US, they have 50 states and one federal district, which is Washington, D.C. And these states are actually the composing parts of the republic, and they have legal attributions of their own. They have areas of public importance, such as security, education, tax, and infrastructure. Actually, taxing in the US is quite important because states collect their taxes, their own taxes. This is something quite important, and when you go to the US, or the people that live there may notice that there are different taxing rates among states, and this is the reason for that. And each state has elected authorities, and thank you very much, Jose. Each state has elected authorities and a constitution of its own. So this makes it of course, a federal system in which each state has its own powers, its own attributions, and it integrates a federation, which is both Mexico and in the US. Now, this is something that we share in both countries, and it is quite important. And actually, Mexico and the US are one of the few countries that have a federal system and a presidential system. I can recall that also Argentina has it, Brazil has it, but there are not many countries that combine both federal presidential systems. This is quite unique, but it is understandable considering how large both of these countries are, and of course the importance of identity of the federal institutions. Now, I would like now to get into matters more a little bit more electoral, and the next slide uh, has to do with the electoral organization in comparison. So in Mexico, as I said, we have a really strict system. It is quite a complex system because it is a system composed of different types of authorities. And the electoral organization is carried out by, especially important, of course, is the National Electoral Institute and the local electoral authorities, known in Spanish as OPLE. And these are local authorities, but they coordinate with the federal authority when carrying out the, the local elections. The National Electoral Authority has a role in local elections. For instance, INE does districting, it does the training of polling workers, and does the electoral registry with or voting ID. And there are a lot of, because of history in Mexico and the large hegemonic system that was once in place, there are different measures to fight distrust. So the system is quite regulated, quite complex. We have ID registry, we have non-erasable ink when we go to vote. The ballots have a lot of different safety measures. And unlike in the US, we have a preliminary official counting of votes. This is to bring certainty the same day of the election of who's winning, and if there's a tendency for someone to win, uh, a mathematical tendency. In the US, in contrast, electoral management is really decentralized. If you vote in the US, and if you have seen elections in the US, you have noticed that each state, sometimes each county has its own local regulations, and each state organizes its own elections. So unlike in Mexico, in which we have the National Electoral Authority that oversees all of the processes. And the local governments, this is super interesting, is responsible for organizing elections. Typically, local congresses have an important role also in electoral organizations. So you can see that the electoral authority in Mexico is independent. In the US, it is not independent. It's organized by the government. And also Congress has an important saying in, for example, the redistricting of the state territory, both for local elections, but also for federal elections. And the system operates based on trust, because as we have seen, well, the US has a long tradition of democracy in which elections have been clean, more or less clean, or clean, quite clean. So people trust the system, and there is not so many needs for these types of measures to fight distrust. So there is no national voter ID. Security measures for the ballots are much more relaxed. A lot of people vote by mail. You may also have noticed this. In Mexico, it is not as common. Only certain people can vote by mail. And these are some of the differences that we have seen. Of course, in recent times, in the 2020 election, uh, the system was contested by the Republican Party. No basis, with no basis in my opinion, but the system, they said that the Republican Party claims that the system is vulnerable, and that the election was stolen by the Democratic Party. So this is something that is changing, because some people believe that the system is not credible and that more security measures should be put in place. But of course, it has not happened, and this is something to look for in 2024 in November. So also, I would like to discuss in the next slide how it is also important to note that electoral regulation is much more stricter in Mexico. Our system in Mexico aims to balance equality in one side and freedom on the other side, whereas the US system privileges the freedom to participate in politics, and not so much the equality. So you can see this in political finance, which of course is key. In Mexico, most of public political funding is public, and it is distributed through INE. The reason for this is to prevent from political actors to be tied to private interests. And political actors are prohibited from purchasing TV or radio advertisements ever since 2008 to 28, as these are allocated government time on national broadcasters on radio and TV. So basically, the government on campaigns allocates times to the political parties to allocate to advertise on TV, so they don't have to buy these spaces, and so they are not tied to the national broadcasters, the media, basically. In the US, most of the political finance comes from private donations. If you live in the US, you have noticed that political funding, it is super important, and candidates are really interested in getting donations, small donations or large donations, also from companies and from people that have a lot of wealth. And based on freedom of speech rights, corporations can purchase media space to support candidates. This is something that was solved by the Supreme Court in the US, which deemed that corporations are able, based on freedom of speech, to purchase TV and radio advertisements and basically participate in electoral campaigns. And this is an important resolution by the court in the US with important consequences. So as you can see, the system in Mexico is much more regulated, and the electoral authority is much more strong. Let's say it's more sturdy than in the US, which is much more decentralized and not as strict in terms of political finance or in terms of national ID to vote. Different elements that compose the system. So it's a lot of content, I know, and I would like to summarize in the next slide. There is wealth of information that we have discussed today. Of course, these are topics that are studied by specialists, and I was trying just to give a brief overview over all these matters, and I hope that you have some ideas and you can extract some ideas. We are going to do a brief dynamic to get some of these things into practice and some of the knowledge that you've gained. But I would like to end my participation with two slides, first on some of the features that we share both in Mexico and the US systems, and then some of the differences. So, as I said, we have a presidential system in Mexico and in the US, and a two-chamber Congress, which is composed by a lower chamber and an upper chamber. And Supreme Courts have the authority to review the constitutionality of laws and government actions. So the Supreme Court is it's the protector of the Constitution, and it overviews the acts of government to guarantee that Constitution is respected. And also important to notice is that we have federal system in which states have their own constitution and elected authorities. These, as we have seen, a product of our history in which local identities and the size of the territory, amount of population, it is important to have a decentralized government that can provide services to the population on local states with strong identities. Now, I would like to touch upon some of the important differences that are worth considering. As we said, because of the electoral system, which is mixed in Mexico, the representation is much more proportional in Mexico than in the US. You can see this by the number of parties that are present in the Mexican Congress, which is more than the bipartisan dynamics that are present in the US. Also, electoral management in Mexico is more robust, the matter is more regulated, and authorities are autonomous and specialized. So as we have seen, we have a National Electoral Institute, which is autonomous, organized election, and unlike the Federal Electoral Commission, which does not have the same powers as INE in the US. And elections in the US are organized by local governments especially. Also, Mexico has specialized authorities in elections at the federal and local levels. As I said, we discussed especially on the Tribunal Electoral, which is a court, but there's also institutes, local institutes, administrative instances, and also prosecutors' office, which are specialized to prosecute crimes in terms of electoral matters. Another thing that it is quite important to take away from this conversation is that the U.S. political finance is mostly private, comes from private donors. Corporations can buy ads on radio and TV, support specific candidate, and this is not possible in Mexico because in Mexico uh, we have built a system that privileges equality and that privileges tries to prevent the influence of private money on politics. So there's public, most of the time, the spending of the parties come from public funds, and also the state allocates TV, radio ads to the political parties and candidates for them to get enough airing space and debate different ideas and showcase their proposals for government doing campaigns. Okay, so this is the summary that we have for you today, and I would like to get you guys well standing from your seats a little bit, doing a fun activity. So on the next slide, there are a set of instructions. If you can do it, we will be really helpful because I promise it's gonna be fun. So if you have your cell phone on a computer, you could go to Kahoot. This is a webpage.it. It's a webpage which is 100% secure. And once there, we are going to show a game pin on the screen, and we are going to do a quick quiz, a pop quiz, and see who got the most out of this workshop. And as I said, it's good to review some of the concepts that we discussed today. So if we could show the game pin, si podemos enseñar el pin, then you can also scan the QR code. And by showing this pin, then you can participate and you can gain more knowledge, and your name is going to be showcased in case you win and you are in the first place, in the first 3 places. So what we're going to do now is to show you the web page in which you can find the pin. You first have to go to kahoot.it, and it's going to ask you for a game pin that we are going to provide you in a few moments. It's going to be about 10 questions, and it you have to answer correctly, but you have to answer quick also, so bear that in mind. You have to be both correct and quick, which is not always easy.
What is the N?
Sorry, we're going to show it in the web page in a few minutes. I think that my colleague here is having a little bit of problems, but I'm gonna show it. Just give me a second to get into the web page.
No worries, your time.
Yeah, thank you. Just give me a second. I think, Ricardo, that you have to change screens for you to show the game pin. Let me try it.
Also, you can post it on the chat, I guess.
Yeah, if you have it, Ricardo, you can put it, lo puedes poner en el chat, and then we can start playing. You know, it's always like this with technology, but just give us a second and we can start.
Hey Hector, this is Jose. What happened if we all get the questions?
Oh, well, you win, basically. So you win the prize of knowledge. There's no material prize here, but of course you're gonna be the first place, and everyone's gonna be recognizing your job. Okay, I have it here. Let's start. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so it's loading. And then we can start. I hope that you can see my screen now. Yeah, so this is, now it's loading. This is the pin 6873121. Let me silence this thing. You also can scan the QR code here. Gonna make it a little bit larger. So now we have 2 participants. Now we have 3, 4. We're gonna wait a little bit more. I think this is an easy quiz, but we're gonna see how it goes. Okay, we have a few. So we're just gonna give a little bit more time to see if more people can join. And well, I just wanted to say you that you were quite good, quite respectful. Nobody had their micro on. I'm sorry if my English is not the best, because I live here in Mexico, and it's not my native language, but I tried my best. So hopefully it didn't go too bad.
No, your English is excellent.
Thank you. I hope it was comprehensible. And we have 15 people now, so I think we can start. Okay, let's start. So this is the first question we're about to start. And the first question is a quiz. In which year did the Mexican Independence War end? This was something that I mentioned at the start of the workshop. So you have to click on the answer that you think is right. You have a little bit, like 20 seconds, not much.
So we can use both WebEx and the website opener, because in the website I'm just seeing the squares or the colors. I'm unable to see what is the number there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that maybe on the cell phone it's gonna be easier to do it. So you can see here that, for instance, 3 people said that 1917 was the year in which the Mexican Independence War ended. 3 people said that 1821, and 4 people 1910. And the correct answer is 1821. So 3 people got it right. And I'm gonna show who's leading now in the scoreboard, which is William. William is in first place because he probably answered in the shorter time. Okay. So the next question, there are 10 questions, and the next question is going to be a true or false question. So both Mexico and the US have a federal government system. Is this true or is it false? I think I mentioned it quite a few times, but let's see. Okay, so 10 people said that it is true. This is true, of course. We are both federal countries. And 2 people said that it was false. Okay, so now Ananda is ahead, and William fell out from grace. Jose is also quite close. And we also have Eric Cuevas and Manuel Calvillo. Okay, so the next question is, the United States has maintained the 1787 Constitution throughout its history. The same Constitution since almost the independence of the nation. Is this true or is it false? This is true, of course. It has been the same Constitution, really influential Constitution, and it only has been amended 27 times, which is quite impressive. And it's a short Constitution also. Okay, so now Jose is winning. Jose M. Okay, let's see the next question. What is the term length for Mexican presidents? This is something that we mentioned at the start when we were discussing executive powers. Okay, most people got it right. You can see it 6 years without the possibility of re-election. Re-election is quite a taboo in Mexico. So there's no re-election for presidents, and in the legislative branch, it is quite limited. So the people that answered the green color are correct. And I see that many people have got all of the answers right. So you have to be quicker if you want to win. And the next question is going to be a true or false. The president of the USA is elected through a direct vote by the citizens. And this is gonna give you a hint. It is an important difference with the Mexican system. So this is false. It is not a direct vote. Actually, you vote for the Electoral College, which in turn decides who is going to be the president. So although currently it is almost direct because the delegates always vote for their candidate, it is through an Electoral College, so it is a two-tier system, and it is not direct. And now we can see that Jose is still winning, and although William is quite close. And Cuevas has climbed 4 positions. I'm sorry, Diego. I think that laptop is not great for this. I'm sorry about that. Maybe.
It's okay, no worries. It's not your fault. So
Yeah, thank you. So how are Supreme Court judges elected in Mexico and the US? It is a bit tough. And 3 people got it right. That is a tough question. They are proposed by the executive and appointed by the Senate. So the executive gives a list in the case of Mexico, and the Senate approves the list. In the case of the US, I think it's just one candidate, and the Senate approves or rejects the proposition. And this, of course, illustrates how the system of checks and balances works. The executive power and the legislative branch coordinate to name to appoint the officials on a third branch, which is the judiciary. Okay, we're almost done, and Jose is still winning. So next question is 7 out of 10. The Mexican system is more proportional, reflects votes into seats better than the American system. Yeah, almost everyone got it right. Yeah, it is more proportional. This is because we have proportional representation in Mexico, and in the US, they only have the first past the post system, in which basically there are a lot of wasted votes that do not get representation. And Jose M is still winning. Okay. Now, true or false? The US Constitution does not include the existence of autonomous bodies. And yeah, 8 people got it right. Yeah, this is true. Only the in Mexican Constitution, not only in the world, but the Mexican Constitution does foresee the existence of autonomous bodies, and the US Constitution does not. These are government agencies which belong to the executive power government. And now Manuel still on the lead. William is quite close, and also Ananda. So, ninth question. How many federal entities does Mexico have? Give you a hint that it is not as many as in the US. Yeah, this is right. 32 states. Of course, less than 50 states in the US. And still Manuel on the lead, was monopolizing the scoreboard. And the last question. Mexico political finance is, I think this is the hardest question. And oh, this is surprising because I thought this was going to be hard. Yeah, in Mexico, political finance is public, and corporations cannot be involved legally in contributions to political parties, and they cannot buy radio or TV advertisements. So the scoreboard, the final scoreboard, is going to be on third place is Ananda. In second place, Manuel Calvillo. In first place, who is it? William. So William won. Congratulations. Okay, this was a lot of fun for me. I hope that you learned a little bit more from this activity. I hope it's fun. I really like Cahoots, but we still have a little bit more time. We have until 7:30, and I would like you to now to interact a little bit with you. What are your thoughts on this presentation on the political systems in a cooperative perspective? And of course, if you have a question, I can try to answer it. So, your turn.
It was quite interesting how the system is the same as the federal system, but they have it in a different way of setting government functions. It's quite fascinating how it works.
Yeah, I think, of course, there has been a large degree of continuity in the US system, and in Mexico, we have had a bit different because we haven't had such a stable government or such a stable system. So I think that the Mexican system has been able to change more, to be more dynamic, But of course, it is quite remarkable that the U.S. system has been in such a long time in place, and still it is working. And of course, it was influential in its time, and I think one of the most important reasons for Mexico to be a federal system is that the U.S. was one and got its independence before Mexico, and of course, the people, the founding fathers of Mexico, um, of course, took inspiration in the story of success and freedom that the U.S. have on the 18th century. So yeah, it is interesting, and well, the American system is still there with few changes. So yeah, interesting to notice that. Thank you. Okay, so I don't know if you can raise your hand, but if no one has any additional questions or comments, I would like to thank you very much to being in this workshop in National Electoral Institute. I would like to thank, of course, Electoral Councilor Castillo, who has a lot of leadership on this topic, on involving people living in both countries to participate. And of course, the consulate network in Mexico. So I hope that you enjoy it, that you have some learning, and well, I'm Hector Duarte, and my email is hector.duarteo@ine.mx, and well, we can stay in touch if you are interested, if you want some material, and I hope that you participate more in some of the projects that we have at INE, and that if you are able to vote for the Mexican election in the next June, you can do it. The registry is still open. So thank you very much, and we'll stay in touch. Bye bye. Have a good afternoon.